me something, Uncle Money?
How y'all doing today? My name is Randall Avery. It's another episode of Building Wealth in Mental Health. We have another guest today, Dr. Bazile. She has an interesting background. Her background, she's a college professor, but she also runs a clinic and the intern process within the college that she operates in. So this is going to be an interesting episode. She has a unique background, a little bit international exposure as well. So I think we're really going to enjoy how she became who she is today. So welcome.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So, can you please tell me a little bit about your job and how you operate in the populations that you serve today?
Yes. So I am an assistant professor at a Christian graduate university here in Atlanta, Georgia. So I am teaching full-time students how to become amazing mental health professionals, as well as I also am the clinical director for our internship training and experience for our students. So there I'm also helping interns with the whole process of getting sites, coordinating with supervisors, and just, being able to survive that internship year that everyone is excited for, but also is really nervous about. So that means I have relationships with the supervisors and some of the community partners in order to, keep our interns having options of where to go. And also, I'm an interim director for our Hope Counseling Center, where we provide mental health services with our interns to the community, mostly through churches that we have partnerships with. And so basically, we target those that typically could not afford mental health counseling.
Very good. I like that. So let's take it back. So before high school, kind of explain your childhood. What was it like growing up? And what was the first trigger for you to know that this space of mental health actually exists?
Yeah. So childhood. So I was raised by immigrant parents, mostly my mom. So my parents are both Caribbean. So I grew up in a very Caribbean household. I always say like it felt like when I was in my house, I was in the Caribbean. And then when I was outside of my house, I was in America. So we just very different things that went on in the house versus the American society. So yeah, so we're very, tight knit with our family. I was fortunate where I had family just like literally like living next door to me when I was really young. And so I grew up really close with my cousins. I'm one of the older cousins kind of now. So helped with just taking care of the younger ones and kind of being there for them. I moved around a lot, so I grew up, we started off like in Pennsylvania, then went to Boston, and ended up moving around a lot with that. So mostly throughout the Northeast, and then eventually my mom and I moved to Florida to help out with my grandparents. So yeah, my childhood, I didn't really get into psychology. Like at first I thought I'm going to be a doctor and, more so in the medical stuff. I knew I wanted to help. I think that was something that was just always part of my spirit, my desire. I got more into psychology when I would visit my uncle and aunt, and my aunt at the time was going to school. They're like my younger uncle and aunt. So I just kind of delved into like her psychology books when I was bored at their house. And that really just like opened my mind and my world up to psychology and just like the way the brain works and sometimes malfunctions when it comes to our cognitive processes. So since then, I think that was like middle school. Since then, it's sort of been like just in my mind that, okay, psychology, counseling, that's the way to go for me.
Very good. So when you informed your family that you were going to be a psychologist, or you might not know exactly, but you were going to go somewhere in mental health, what type of support did you receive? Because we know to become a doctor, it takes a lot of some type of support, maybe some type of, just vigor to go through the process. What type of support did you receive when you announced that you were going to go in the mental health space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, thinking of it. I don't think I don't think my family really understood like counseling and all that. Coming from like an immigrant family, mental health or going to see like a therapist wasn't a norm. It's like if you have problems, you go to Jesus was the typical thing. So yeah, I don't know if I really talked about it with my family, maybe with my cousins around my age, because they would get it, being growing up here in America. But yeah, as far as like my mom or other older adults in my life and my family, I didn't really like mention it until I don't know. I think they just kind of saw what I was doing. I was like, okay, just. I think the question was like, are you going to be able to make money? Are you going to be able to support yourself? That's really what you want to do? And, why don't you go into nursing or something? But yeah, eventually, I mean, they got on board with it overall, but it wasn't like oh, that makes sense to them kind of thing.
So, how did you select your undergraduate and graduate colleges? Like, what was the influence that you had? Who was talking to you at that time? What was going through your mind during those stages?
Influence. So I'm first generation college grad, and yeah, I think both sides of my family. So support was mainly from I remember I have one aunt. She helped kind of support me there. Um, Originally, I was planning to go to school in New England because that's where we lived. During my senior year, or right in the beginning of my senior year, we moved to Florida. So I was sort of like in this lost world of like, well, I want to go back up to Boston, but my mom wants me to stay here. And so I didn't really know what to do until like last minute is when I started applying. So I just thought about like the schools I wanted to go to that were not too far away. So we lived in Orlando, so I mostly looked at schools in South Florida. I think I was just more attracted to the schools down there. And I had two top choices. I had Florida International University and University of Miami. I got accepted into both. But University of Miami, even though I had a scholarship from the state lottery. So like in Georgia, you have like the Hope Scholarship, I think is called. In Florida, it was Bright Futures at the time. So I had 75%, I believe, of that that would pay my college. So University of Miami being a private college would take less than that. So basically it became a financial reason why I decided not to go to UM. And FIU, I think all I had to do was like pay for some of my room and board, and that was it. So, and it ended up being well. Like I loved being at FIU. It was very international. I mean, Miami is overall, but I got to be around other Caribbeans and other people from other, like Latin countries that I was not familiar with. I really became like a young adult at FIU. So I'm happy it all worked out that way.
Any advice for a young person moving from Boston down to the South? I guess Florida is a little different than just Southeast, but to Florida and the South, like, what would you tell somebody to prepare for that experience?
Prepare for the culture shock.
Yeah.
Whether you are white or black. So in the North, I I was very much the minority. In Boston, there's a big Asian population. So in my elementary and middle schools and high schools, it was whites, Asians, and then, very small percentage of Blacks and Hispanics. So I wasn't used to being around a lot of other Black kids, in school settings and whatnot. It was mostly just like in my family, my church, where I, I was part of the majority group there, I guess you could say. So coming down to the South, and being in a high school where I don't know the exact ratios, but it was a lot of brown skinned people. And so that for me was a culture shock because it was like, oh, I'm not used to having this many other brown skinned people around me. So it was a welcome thing, but also just like a big shock to me.
Yeah, I think that's important. in Atlanta, we kind of stay in a bubble thinking, there's a lot of us, you don't really feel like the minority. But if you go to other states, other major cities, you definitely feel like there's a difference here as far as the ratio. So
Yeah.
while you're in college, was there anything significant that you believed helped you on your career today that happened to you? Was it a class that you took? Was it maybe a teacher that really made you say, "Oh, this is something I can, devote my life to"?
Yeah. I had one professor who, she was actually new to the university and I think new to the whole professorship, but she was great. She took me under, made me her grad assistant, and just kind of showed me like the research part of psychology and just some of the options related to psychology. I think there was times I was still like on the fence because I would have some of my peers say, well, what do you think about being like a nurse practitioner in in with what do they call it? I think counseling, nurse practitioner, I forgot, psychiatry or something. And so I was like, no, I don't think so. So I wish I remembered her name. I can see her face, but I can't remember her name. But yeah, but she was very helpful, just sort of like take me under her wing and help me to kind of to get that research experience, which is needed for grad school, and just to be exposed to the different aspects of psychology and all the fields related to that. And then I think yeah, it was for my career. I think just the friends I made in college was also helpful in me developing um, as an ethnic minority and just being able to be feeling more comfortable in my skin as an ethnic minority and not just feeling like a minority in a big majority world.
Understood. That makes sense. So you obtained your undergraduate degree. You decided to further your education. Now, there's different programs. There's programs where you can, it's kind of like a combination of a master's and a doctorate program. You decided to take all two steps after that. What went through your mind? How did you think about financing? And also talk about the kind of support that you needed to make it through that process.
Yeah, it was a hard decision. So originally, my plan was to go from undergrad to uh, psychology PhD graduate level. And I got really scared through the admissions process because they, part of that process is they require a lot of research experience. And I felt like even though I did have some, I felt like I didn't have enough, as well as I don't think we fully published our study. So I didn't have like that publication under me as well. So I didn't feel like I was going to be, you know, a good candidate for that program. I had my best friend, she was going to college in Orlando. And so she said, well, why don't you apply to the program I'm applying to, which was at Rollins College, and that's the master's level. And so I thought, I kind of hemmed and hawed, and I thought, well, it is a good program. I did look into it and everything. And so, so yeah, I decided to do that and I got accepted, and I feel like my, life took off from there. So again, like it was, I feel like I'm kind of seeing like a theme, like, my first choices, um, is not like necessarily like what God wanted for me. And he had like a better second option that's actually, the best option for me. Because Rollins College, I got to interface with some really great professors who are well known in the field. And I got really great clinical training there. So yeah, so I did that, graduated, and then about 6 years later, I was like, you know what? I really want to get my PhD. I want to teach. I want to mentor and supervise and do more. I loved counseling, and I saw that like whenever I would be working with interns from other programs, that they would come to me because I was like, I guess the young new counselor who was available, and they would come to me, and I really loved like just mentoring them and just helping them like in an informal way. And so that just reinforced my desire to go back to school and get my doctorate.
So speak to somebody who, let's say they're in their junior year of undergraduate degree. what would you advise them to think about when they're selected and they want to stay in the mental health space? What would you advise them to think about obtaining their master's, obtaining their doctorate? Like, what are some key points that they should be considering to see what is a good fit for me?
Yeah, I always say, think about what you want your life to look like 5 years from now. So, and then work your way back. So 5 years from now, do you want to be a therapist where you're seeing, clients on a regular basis, maybe doing workshops as well? Or would you rather do more testing where people are coming in for those psychological testing? Because, that's a different field in a sense. So just, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years, or like, once you're finished with a graduate program? And then from there, just work backwards as to what's needed. So if you want to go straight into a PhD program, do you have the research experience, or do you have that publication? Are you wanting to do more just research, and less of the people piece, or the people focused piece? Or do you want to, just like be in front of people and helping counsel them through their issues? And then I would look at the accreditation of the programs, because that makes a big difference, especially if you want to get licensed. I would say that I think the best thing to do is talk to people, talk to at least 3 to 5 people in the field, that are doing different things within that field. And that really helps you get a better picture of, what you want your next 5 years to look like.
You brought up two things that I think is interesting. How does an undergraduate gain research experience? And also, if somebody's reaching out to say, I think I want to do this, what do you think? What methods do they go through? LinkedIn? Do you recommend cold emailing, cold calling? Like, how do you think about those two things, gaining research experience and also networking to know what you want to do next?
The professors in your campus, they are like the best and first resources. So especially, bigger colleges, a lot of undergrad programs, they will have professors doing research, having research labs. And so connecting with them, you're probably taking a class that one of them is teaching. And so connecting with them, which is kind of like what I did, and saying like, I'm really interested in learning more. Can I, become a GA or work under you or something? And then so forming those relationships. So I would say the networking starts while you're in college with your professors, because they have the connections, right? So forming those relationships with them, and not being afraid to ask questions like, hey, who would you recommend I talk to if I'm interested in getting more into psychiatry? And they probably can tell you. Or if they don't know, they know somebody who does know. My students, they'll come to us, and we'll be able to give them direction of like, hey, yeah, why don't you talk to this person, or let me connect you with this colleague of mine who, is out there in the community, who's doing something that you're interested in doing, and see like what they say. So that, the networking starts like on campus.
I like that. I like that a lot. So you obtained your doctorate. Um, how did you think about what's next for yourself? Who informed you to say, this is the path for me? This is the college I should apply to, or the different experience? So what was next for you after you obtained your doctorate?
What was next for me? Well, what was next for me was getting the assistant professor position. So I obtained my doctorate 2019. So, doing all sorts of applications, and just kind of, you pretty much just send your application to all the possible universities that are saying they need someone, and hoping you get a call back. It's really hard in the beginning. I'm sure like with any career, when you're going in, it's really hard for people to call you back. But I talk to friends and to my professors about places. We have a conference that we have two conferences. There's a biannual one, and then there's one that's more regional. So I would go to those conferences and I would network there. I knew that, one of my professors knows this person, and so I would have them. My professor would be at the conference. I would have them introduce me to that person, and I would have like these business cards even before I graduated to connect and to say like, hey, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I hope to be doing, and I would love a chance to talk to you if there's any career possibilities there, and going to the career talks at those conferences. That was very helpful as well. So just like for my field, at least, like those conferences really help students to be able to, get to that next step or to kind of form those bridges that will get you to that next step.
Gotcha. Now, you also worked at a location called ThriveWorks. I've heard a lot about them. Can you explain what ThriveWorks does and your role, and what was your experience there?
Yeah, you read my CV. So ThriveWorks it's like a franchise, I guess you could say private or group practice for counseling. So they're all over the United States. So they're just making themselves available for mental health. My experience there, I was a staff therapist. So I got to see, clients as I wanted and was able to kind of make my own schedule. By the time I was working at ThriveWorks, I was more confident in being able to say like, this is the schedule I want. This is the population that I specialize in, that I want to see. And this is the population that I don't feel as competent in seeing. So, so there I saw adult individuals, young adult, young women, just going through various life issues, some more severe mental health like bipolar disorder or depression. Anxiety is always a big one. So yeah, it was like your typical group practice. The people, the owners, the franchise owners, I guess you could say, they actually broke away from ThriveWorks and made their own practice. And so I stayed with them through that transition. Yeah, so it was interesting kind of seeing how they transitioned that, but just good business, I guess a good business experience.
Okay. What do you think about that? So when you talk to students about private practice, the option of going into that space, how do you tell students to think about this versus being a teacher versus maybe going in a government job like the VA or something with the state and local government? How do you differentiate those different professions?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. So at the end of the day, you're doing counseling at all of those, right? It's kind of just what it looks like and how much control you have and how much you have to do in a sense. So the VA, you're going to specialize with military. You're not going to have to worry about marketing and doing all that. You're probably on a set salary and it's okay. Working 40 hours and you're not worried about benefits or anything like that. Versus like private practice, uh, you might be a contract worker and not a full-time W-2 employee. So private practice, you're thinking about whether you're a contract worker, you're W-2, whether you have to market yourself, how much that's going to cost. So there might be a lot more money that you're spending in order to be successful with private practice because you're having to work harder to get your clients come into the door because you're competing with a bunch of other private practices, right? Also, the scope of severity may be different depending on where you're working at. So private practice, and depends on what you're specializing in as well. It may not be like severe and persistent mental illness, whereas community agencies or places like the VA, you may have some more severe mental health because of like combat PTSD. And you may be working with like in a team setting as far as with psychiatrists, doctors, nurses, and all that to help be part of their treatment team. Whereas private practice, you may not be so much. So My students usually have an idea of what they're called to at the time. And so they'll know like, okay, I want to work in private practice, or I want to do a mix of both, because in the beginning, it's really hard to just like go into private practice, right? And get those hours and get the money that you need to survive. So they might be doing both. Some of them know like, no, I want to continue school and I want to get my PhD and I want to teach. And so, we talk to them about that. So I kind of go with what the student feels called for and just, yeah, give them the explanation of like what may be different. Some students do not want to continue school, so they're ready to go in the workforce, and that's great. And then others want to stay in school because it's what they know.
So you mentioned that you had a specialty. So how do you advise people to find their specialty? Like, how do I know I'm going to connect with a population? What is my measure of success with certain type of populations? Like, how did you figure out this is for me, and it's actually working?
Yeah, it was, I would say, just dipping my toe in different things, and trial and error. So, let's see. So during my internship experience at my master's, I got to work at a more community-based agency. So I got to see a whole variety of different disorders and people from different walks of life. And I found myself connecting more with the clients, or connecting with the clients that had bipolar disorder and depression. And so I and I don't know if I realized it at that time, but looking back, I also started really enjoying working with young women and getting them to feel like empowered. I think that part came later where I realized that, but yeah, it's sort of just like this feeling you get of like, oh, I really like this one. I like this, I like working with this issue or this disorder or this concern and these type of people. Um, and so yeah, and some of that grew as I grew as a counselor, but yeah, it's just like I think it's just like a feeling like you know.
I like it. I like it. So in what you do day in and day out, what is the consistent challenge young women are facing in today's environment?
Oh, I think it comes down, I feel like I feel like this is very generalized, but there's it comes down to self-esteem
Mhm.
and feeling like they're allowed to be assertive. I think that comes from like our own society and our society's what our society tells us what women should be, what a good girl is. And um here in the South, that's like even more ingrained in women. So I think it comes down to that, where where women are struggling with like, is it okay for me to break this, belief system and be an assertive woman who is not just here to raise kids and marry a man or a person, yeah, so I think it comes down to some of that, as well as like the trauma that women and everybody, but that women face and young women face, and helping them heal from that, because it's amazing how you know college age students, there's so much trauma that they've dealt with as kids. And women especially, it's usually sexual abuse or something, some sort of toxic relationship, and that carries with them, as they grow, and can really distort the way they're thinking of themselves and of relationships, and just of like their interpersonal interactions they have with people, especially of the opposite sex.
Yeah, 100% agree. So you decided to become a professor. You decided I want
Mhm.
to stand in front of a classroom and mold young minds. What was that thought process? What is the journey of a professor? Because a lot of people don't know it's you just don't apply and now you're a tenured professor. There's steps to
Yeah,
this. So what was
yeah.
that process like, the feeling that you receive when you're in front of an audience of students?
I'm laughing because I don't like being in front of an audience of anybody. I'm more of an introvert and yeah, I get nervous, being in front of large crowds or in front of people. But I've learned to, I guess in some ways I've learned to manage that, I guess just through exposure. So what I love though is the conversations and discussions that I have with students. And and through that helping them to learn about whether it's like ethics or multiculturalism or whatever we're talking about. And so I love seeing them, I guess it's almost like seeing them kind of go like, huh, I never thought about that, or I never thought of it this way. And, and just like the conversations that come from that, that's the part that I love. And just seeing them grow, from year one to year three, like they're just a whole different person. They're more confident in their skills. And yeah, that's the part. I think it's just that student interaction that I really love.
I like that. You
And
mentioned
then,
some.
on top, oh, sorry.
Please go. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then on top of that, being able to teach something that I love, which is counseling, because like it still fascinates me. And so being able to just like impart that on them and get them as excited about it as I am about it. That part I love as well.
On a side note, you mentioned something ethics, and in the financial services world, we get taught heavy ethics and compliance and things of that nature. But when I learned about ethics, it does shift the way you think about life, like what is right and wrong, what is appropriate. One could argue, why isn't ethics taught at a younger age? People to be
Hmm.
considered about. I'm just wondering, because you teach ethics in the profession, like what would teaching ethics younger may potentially do to a population?
That's interesting. So in some ways, we teach about ethics in a way where we're teaching about morals, right? So we're teaching kids what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. And that's the sort of beginning stages of ethics. I think part of it is, we have to meet the kid where they're at developmentally. And so something as more fine-tuned as ethics may be harder, to talk about like, your integrity and wanting to, make sure you're doing what's in the best interest of whoever, might be a little too much for them to understand. So I think teaching about morals, and we do that, if you're a religious person, you do that through your religious beliefs and what your religious books say or whatever. And for some people, they're just imparting to their kids what they believe as far as like their morals and what's right and what's wrong, kind of thing. So I think we do that. I think we call it something different. And maybe during maybe when they're teenagers or like maybe end of middle school age, like that preteen age, talking more about ethics and integrity and wanting to internalize that to be a good person, I think there could be helpful for society and for kids. I I want to believe that we are doing that, especially as parents, we're doing that. But it's hard to always just find time to sit down and say, okay, let's look at this and let's look at like how to be a good person. We expect the schools or the church or whatever program to do that for our children.
Very good. Thank you for detouring for me for a second. So,
Yeah.
so how did you decide the college that you wanted to teach at? What was your criteria personally? And what are some criteria you think those going into becoming a professor should consider?
Yeah. So, um, Okay, so higher ed is really interesting and it's changing a lot now than before. So I would say one thing to consider is whether you want to be tenured track or if you're okay with being more contract. A lot of schools are moving towards more contract. So like every couple of years or every year, your contract is being renewed. And you are moving up in levels, sort of like the tenure, but it's just kind of called a little differently or looks different than the traditional tenure track that you would sign on to. Initially, when I was doing the search, I thought about the states I wanted to live in. So I was very open to moving. And so I was looking mostly at Texas and California because Georgia, for my program that I teach under counselor ed, there's only a small amount of programs that Georgia has, and especially in the Atlanta area. So I didn't want to really move to South Georgia. If I was going to stay in Georgia, when I wanted to be in the Atlanta metro area, and so I only had like 2 or 3 pickings, and one of those was probably the school I graduated from. Maybe 4 pickings, but yeah, so that's a factor. So thinking about like where you're willing to move to, because it's easier to find a job if you open your net, right? If you're open to the 50 states or however many states versus if you're just saying like, I just want to stay in this area, then you're very limited and you're competing against, people you graduated with and other people. So yeah, so initially I was open to moving and then let's see. Then I was about to have my son. So then that sort of changed my thinking about being able to move. So I decided, so it was best for me to stay in the Atlanta area. Unfortunately, I had a colleague who said, hey, we have an opening I really, I had already known about the school. I had already interfaced with some of the professors there, with the dean at the time there. So I knew it was a good school. And honestly, like in the community and in the mental health world of Atlanta, it's a well-known school. Richmond produces like amazing counselors. And so thinking like, I want to be a part of that. So yeah, let me send in my application packet, was just like a no-brainer there. Other things to consider is whether you want to teach more versus do more research. So some schools are more teaching schools. Where I'm at, it's more teaching focused, whereas other schools, which is usually the bigger universities, are more research focused. So you'll probably end up teaching less classes and have a more stringent expectation on your scholarship, your research production there. So if you ever heard of like that parish or was it publish or perish saying in academia, that comes from that research focus or schools. Whereas teaching, it's a little bit harder to do your research because you tend to be teaching more classes. And yeah, but your expectations of research production is less because of that. And then of course finances, like how much are you, what does your packet look like? What benefits are you gonna have? And some of the stuff that you want to negotiate with, like if you're going to move, are they going to pay for your move? And that's stuff that you can always like negotiate in there. And then I would say the culture too, every college, every institution has a different culture. So does that culture fit with you? Can you see yourself thriving within that culture?
So you decided to move to Georgia. You went from Boston to Florida, and now you're in Georgia. What was the culture like in the Atlanta metro area? What has your experience been so far?
Yeah, so I've been in Georgia now for 12 years, I want to say. what is the culture like? So what I guess what's kept me in Atlanta is that I like that I'm not, as far as numbers go, I'm not you know, a minority in a sense, as far as like, numbers go. I remember a few years ago, I went to an event with a friend, and this was like a really nice little event. And I remember like getting excited because I was like, oh my God, there's there's like a lot of Black people here. Like it was like a good mix of races. And but just to see that, I wasn't the only Black person, or that, there wasn't only like two more Black people there, was really exciting to me. So that's one of the things I really appreciate about Atlanta, is that diversity that we have. And so that I don't feel like, pretty much anywhere I go in Atlanta, there's successful Black people. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing I noticed. I also noticed that Atlanta does not have a beach. And so that was, or anywhere near a beach, I should say. And so that was very disappointing. And was it called Lake Lanier does not count as a beach, in my opinion.
We have a ghost lake. Okay. Who else has a haunted lake that they can climb?
Yeah, yeah,
Like it. I
yeah.
like. So
But
let's talk about compensation as a professor.
yeah.
What should someone be expecting to make as a college professor? What are the levels, as far as you mentioned, contract renewals, tenured professor? So if somebody wants to be a professor, what type of lifestyle should I be expecting as far as compensation?
Hmm. The thing is, it ranges so much depending on the school and the, I guess, area of the United States you live in. So I had a visiting assistant professor line in Texas when I first graduated. And the compensation just for visiting was amazing. They were even willing to pay for my relocation, but because it was COVID, I didn't have to relocate. So I was working remotely and making this like pretty great amount. Which is typical for like for a university, a large university. And so it also varies on whether we're talking about like a large university or a smaller college, right? So University of Texas systems, pretty large, and they're all over Texas. So they've got money. And I have a friend who worked at another large university, and so that pay was pretty comparable to what I was getting in Texas. Uh, Here, moving to a smaller college, I had to take a pay cut
Mm.
because asking for what I wanted, I probably have to be like a full professor, or asking for what I had before. So I would say I don't know how to answer, because it really depends on the area you're living in. I met someone who worked in California as a professor, and she was still struggling.
Mm.
Like she had to have a roommate, and it was like San Francisco area, so super expensive. And it was typical to hear professors making like 50,000 out there.
Mhm.
So that's on the lower end. And 50,000 somewhere else may be great, depending on the expenses of the city. So I would say that, gosh, that's a hard one to answer again, because it just varies so widely. And that's the crazy thing. Um, Maybe 50 is the minimum. I don't think anybody would accept anything less. And again, I'm talking from a few years ago, so with inflation and all that, it may be higher. You can still live, I would say you could still live comfortably outside of California for the starting salary and to negotiate. So at my school, they start like assistant professors start within a certain range, and then we go up. I don't know exactly by how many thousands, but once you hit associate professor, like, and this is with all schools, tenured or contract, you're going to go up should be a good decent amount, as well as full professor, much higher. And again, university level, large universities, you're going to be really up there as you move up. Smaller colleges, it may take longer, and you may have to add things into your life to subsidize some of that in there.
Understand. So how does, let's say somebody's on a contract basis as a professor, how do they plan for things like retirement? What are the options that have been told to you, that they advise you, say, hey, you're probably not going to get the full 401k match that a tenured professor may have. You may. And also, you have to think about health insurance that may or may not be offered. So how do people approach that aspect of their life if they're on a contract basis? Are contracts different for professors?
Yeah, so when I say contract basis, it's not like a 1099 contract.
Mhm.
So you're still a full-time employee with full benefits. It's just it's just an alternative to the tenure track. And so it doesn't really have to do as much with the HR side of things, I guess you could say, or maybe the payroll side of things.
I think I
Yeah,
understand. There's a
yeah.
set start and end agreed upon by two people. That's why you're considered a contract.
So yeah, basically I think the main reason colleges started contracts was because it feels, I guess, maybe to their benefit, because you can say like, hey, we have an out. Whereas when you're tenured, it's really hard to get rid of you.
Mhm.
So with contracts, you can say like, all right, we've got just 3 years with this lady, we can kick her out, kind of thing. But yeah, so it's you're still able to get like the full benefits, the full match of your 401k and all that as contract. It's more, yeah, it's different here in academics with that.
Gotcha. So who advised you on your, I think usually for institutions like 403Bs, the retirement plan, like was there somebody in your life who said, hey, I think you should do this? Did you always know that? Did you grow up in a household that talked about money? What was going through your mind when you were offered this nice friendly match?
Yeah. Some of it was experience from other jobs and having some, HR folks who were able to explain all that to me earlier on, in my career and life experiences. We did not talk about finances in the sense of how to grow your finances or retirement plans in my home, because it was always just, my mom works 2 jobs and we're still struggling and all that. Um, I did get some advice from some professors, when I was up for the job search and just talking about ways to negotiate and what things to look for. Uh, yeah, so that was helpful. I wouldn't say, unfortunately, there wasn't like a financial planner that came in and talked to us about the options or anything like that. That would have been very helpful. Some of it I've kind of just had to research on my own. And again, like those life experiences where I've these things have been introduced to me and I've done some reading and stuff behind it have helped a lot, as well as like some random podcasts that I've listened to about finances and how to set yourself up for retirement.
So as a professor, you almost have to keep your, finger on the pulse of technological changes coming down. And the big thing is telehealth. How do you practice? There's big companies like Crossover, that do things a little bit different than the traditional sit down on a couch therapy. How do you see technology shifting in your world? And what is your opinion about it?
Technology is actually one of my research areas, technology and counselor ed. So I love it. I think it's great. And I think that the counseling field tends to be a bit behind with technology, at least historically. And so I think now we're sort of being forced to move faster and move more forward, especially since the pandemic. So that really helped, a lot of the helping fields really to get to get into technology and to be more willing to accept it. So having telehealth is great. It's so convenient for clients, you know, who need it, and for clinicians who need it. I don't see that going anywhere. One of the issues with that is also like you have all these different organizations or that need to sort of like get in line so that it can all work really well. So with telehealth, there comes the concern of, well, are you practicing across state lines because you're on a computer screen, and where is your client located? So the state boards have to figure out what's agreed upon, what's allowed here. And we just had legislation, not just, but within the past couple of years, well, two, maybe, we've just had legislation passed where counselors will be able to counsel across state lines legally with something called the compact. And so we're waiting for that to just for us to be able to send in our applications and do that. Now AI is a big thing, and how we're using AI. So especially like in higher ed, you know, the concern is students are going to fabricate their papers through AI and all that. AI can create treatment plans really well. And so right now I'm studying how to use AI in the classroom to help students and to teach students how to use it in a ethical way, so that, you know, that can help them, but also keep them from like plagiarizing or doing anything wrong. And then for counselors and supervisors, like how can we use AI to help with our clinical practice and with our supervisees and stuff. So there's so much coming out, and I don't think there's enough like space to be able to like tell everyone like, hey, you know, this is a new thing. Let's try this. Let's do that. But I think it's exciting. It's like an exciting time, I think, right now with technology and in counseling.
How is it teaching in an AI-driven world? You have papers that need to be written. You know, some classes are remote. So any concerns being a teacher in this new age?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, I think at first that was like the main concern for everyone is about plagiarism and whether students, you know, would use AI to create those papers. There's some research or maybe more anecdotes that are saying like, you know, students aren't doing that as much, but I've caught, and not, yeah, I've caught a student or two doing that. And so, yeah, so that's the scary part. And I think it just goes back to like educating and, you know, the ethics piece there of, you know, what's your integrity about? Are you, yeah, it's so easy to just have something create a paper for you, but does that feel good inside for you, you know? And would it be easier to just have a conversation with the professor and say, I just need more time, you know, with this? So I think like in my classrooms, like just talking about how we can use AI and being able to have discussions around it. You know, it's like sex, like talking about sex, like with, you know, middle schoolers. Like if the idea was like, if we don't talk about it and, you know, just tell them don't do it, they're not going to do it. But that's not true, right? We've seen that. So just the same thing where, oh, sorry. Okay. I don't know how to make it not do that. So just the same thing where, you know, let's talk about it. Let's acknowledge that it's here and how we can use it in a ethical, integral way.
Yeah, that's tough. And I want to dig a little bit deeper. So in my world, you know, they required us to memorize formulas. And you memorize the formulas so you really know the relationships of two different functions. How do you think about in your space on the students internalizing, you know, different things versus I can easily look it up? Because you know, I don't have to calculate the formula. I have calculators. I can, you know, put something in online. Like, where is that balance of I needed to internalize it to be a professional versus I can just easily look that up and the result is the same at the end of the day?
Oh, but the result is not the same. Um, I think well, maybe this is why we have ethics in the first semester, is because we're creating this identity of a counselor who is ethical, a student who is ethical, and the integrity and the morals that go behind that, right? So part of the teaching is we don't want you to just be ethical just to be ethical, just to say you are. We want you to truly value that and believe that. And so having discussions and, activities around like, how can I make this a part of my life and a part of me and an identity? Not just because I don't want the board to come after me one day, but because I want to be that stand-up person, that stand-up student, that stand-up counselor. So yeah, I think it starts there, and then, you know, yeah, maybe you can, put something in ChatGPT and it creates an output, but then can you at least tailor it to yourself? Can you put your voice behind it? It's not going to give you the citations that we ask for. So there's still going to be work to be done. And then are you willing to risk being dropped out of school and losing, financial aid, losing this dream that you had to be a counselor, and having to disappoint yourself and your family and everybody else who's been invested in your goal here. So yeah, I think it's a lot of conversation and helping the student to find the reason why for them to want to be integral.
Gotcha. And even move past integrity, I think it's more of the lesson design plan as far as what am I teaching the students are more of what I'm requiring them to memorize on a test versus the functionality. So I think you mentioned you're leaning more in the technology. So how much should we lean on technology versus the humanness that makes it work, I guess. I'm trying to
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah. Well, I think in my field, we realize that the human piece has a really special component to it that technology can't ever bring. So even when we're doing telehealth, like you can ask clinicians or clients, it doesn't feel the same as when somebody's in your office. I can't read your whole body and see like what's going on completely. If we're doing telehealth, all I can do is just go off of your face and maybe your shoulders, and that's it. And I might be missing something else, like that foot tapping that's telling me that you're getting anxious when we're talking about this thing, right? So and I also believe that like the energy, that you get when you're like in the same room with someone. So technology, I think, is helpful, but I don't think it can ever replace that human interaction, and that, real life interaction, or I don't know what you call it, but like in-person interaction. There's just like this nuance that's missing from technology there.
I love it. So this is an episode on building wealth and mental health. What is the number one financial advice that you may give colleagues, students to say, hey, if you do this, you'll be more on the right path towards financial freedom?
Oh boy. Don't take out student loans. That will get you on the right path. I would say get you on the right path, financial freedom. I would say don't limit yourself to just one thing. So people typically think as therapists, we're just being therapists, right? We're just seeing clients, and you have to have like a week's worth of a full day's caseload in order to make money, and that's not the case. You can do workshops, you can become a speaker, you can teach even at the master's level. There's a couple of classes that you can do as an adjunct. There's you can like create whatever you want. You can create your own practice and have people working under you, and you're just kind of doing the more so the business side of it. So Yeah, I would say just don't limit yourself in what you can do with your degree, whether it's a master's level or a PhD level. And I think really that's what helps with that's the main thing that helps with building financial freedom is just not limiting ourselves and having multiple avenues, I guess, of income.
I love that. That's an excellent answer. And I think that's something a lot of people should think about because there's a lot of ways to make money if you have the drive to do so. Well, Dr. Bazile, I think the information you shared is important, especially somebody wanting to become a professor, things to think about. I think your talk on technology and the mix of human, I think that's something that's going to live pretty well over time. So thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
The more I know, the more money I can make.